Greetings and welcome to the Hope Recovery Podcast, hosted by Greg Schmalhofer. The Hope Recovery Podcast provides faith-based recovery messages to help you be successful in recovery and to grow in your faith as well. Hello and welcome to the Hope Recovery Podcast. I'm your host, Greg Schmalhofer, and this is episode number 57. And this is the podcast episode for January and the very first episode of the brand new year of 2024. If I may add a personal note before we get to the message for today, this episode is released the first week of January, and I'd like to wish a special happy birthday greeting and shout out to my sister Christine, who had a birthday the last week of December. So, Christine, happy birthday, and thank you so much for all of your encouragement and all of your prayers for me and for the ministry of Hope Recovery. Moving on, today's podcast episode is called The Message of Step 12. And while I'm sure many of you are quite familiar with the 12 steps, I'd like you to try and consider just two steps. The step 1 and step 12, without considering the steps in between, at least for now. So at least for right now, I'd ask you to just look at step 1 and then step 12 as well, and see what those two steps can teach us about recovery, and ultimately what these two steps show us about the true message of step 12. The message of step 12 is absolutely important for those in recovery and even for everyone as well. Step 12 reveals a key factor that has helped many to be successful in recovery. And as we look at just step 1 and step 12, we can perhaps gain a fresh new perspective on the 12 steps and what the founders viewed as critical for success in recovery. Step 1 of Narcotics Anonymous states, "We admitted we were powerless over our addiction, that our lives had become unmanageable." As we consider the wording of step 1, it does seem quite reasonable that some type of statement like this would be included. It seems that the founders would describe someone just beginning their recovery would express these same sentiments, that they would feel they were powerless over their addiction and that their lives would have become unmanageable. So in many ways, this is not really surprising that the founders would start step 1 with some type of statement like this. The wording of step 1 is quite dramatic. It speaks of being powerless over our addiction and that our lives had become unmanageable. Certainly, these are not positive descriptions of life and where the addict is at the beginning of step 1. But the way that step 1 begins is a positive statement. That step 1 begins with, "We admitted." This is the beginning of honesty and is the beginning of reaching out for help. And even this type of honesty and reaching out for help is a reasonable part of step 1. So for me, it does seem that step 1 is a reasonable and appropriate place for the founders to start for a step 1 of recovery. Several quotes from the Alcoholics Anonymous Big Book reflect this condition of the addict as expressed in step 1, such as from page 8 of the AA Big Book that says, "No words can tell of the loneliness and despair I found in that bitter morass of self-pity. Quicksand stretched all around me in all directions. I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master." And then from page 24 of the AA Big Book that says, "The fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice in drink. Our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. We are unable at certain times to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or month ago. We are without defense against the first drink. And also from page 58 of AA that says this: remember that we deal with alcohol, cunning, baffling, powerful. Without help, it is too much for us. And then from page 7 of the Narcotics Anonymous book that says, our addiction enslaved us. We were prisoners of our own mind and were condemned by our own guilt. We gave up the hope that we could ever stop using drugs. Our attempts to stay clean always failed, causing us pain and misery. As addicts, we have an incurable disease called addiction. The disease is chronic, progressive, and fatal. These quotes from AA and NA describe in vivid fashion the terrible condition of the addict and the alcoholic as they approach step 1. These quotes from AA and NA all powerfully describe the hopeless condition of the addict and alcoholic as they are starting step 1. Perhaps you are just now at step 1 or are considering step 1, and these quotes describe how you feel right now, that you are powerless and feel hopeless. If that is where you are right now, please know that there is indeed hope. As you listen to this podcast, you will see that the 12 steps do not leave you without hope, and that God does not leave you without hope as well. Let me share a Bible passage that I feel relates well to step 1 and these feelings of being powerless and hopeless. The passage is from Romans chapter 7, verses 21 through 24, and it goes like this: I have discovered this principle of life, that when I want to do what is right, I inevitably do what is wrong. I love God's law with all my heart, but there is another power within me that is at war with my mind. This power makes me a slave to the sin that is still within me. Oh, what a miserable person I am. This Bible passage quote is revealing and shows us that God does indeed understand us. This seems, in many ways, to describe the addict and the alcoholic, that while I want to do what is right, I inevitably do what is wrong. Other translations end that passage with, what a wretched man I am. This passage from Romans 7 seems to be quite consistent with step 1 of recovery, that I want to do what is right, but I always do what is wrong. I want to do what is right, but I can't, or I want to stop, but I can't. And so step 1 describes the addict and the alcoholic in a terrible condition, as powerless over their addiction and with a life that has become unmanageable. But now let's begin to transition to step 12. The 12 steps of recovery do not leave us without hope. They do not leave us at step 1. They do not leave us as powerless or with a life that is unmanageable. Alcoholics Anonymous on page 25 says that so many want to stop but cannot. There is a solution. And later it goes on to say, the great fact is just this and nothing less, that we have had deep and effective spiritual experiences which have revolutionized our whole attitude toward life, toward our fellows, and toward God's universe. The central fact of our lives today is the absolute certainty that our Creator has entered into our hearts and lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. He has commenced to accomplish those things for us which we could never do by ourselves. This AA quote is a great introduction to step 12. As step 12 of NA states, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message to addicts and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Before we go any further, let me pause and consider again step 1 that states, we admitted that we were powerless over our addiction, that our lives had become unmanageable. And that seemed quite reasonable and appropriate for someone starting out in recovery. Step 1 did not seem surprising, but rather seemed like just the right place to start. But step 12, to me, seems rather surprising that it would be the last of the 12 steps, and to say what they say. Certainly, if you consider all the steps in between step 1 and step 12, there is a natural progression that does lead to step 12. But to look at step 1 and then to jump to step 12, to me it seems surprising and even somewhat unexpected. The founders could have said many different things for step 12. They could have put the focus in many different places, but they chose to emphasize right at the beginning of step 12 that a spiritual awakening was necessary for recovery. What step 12 really does is absolutely highlight the importance of having a spiritual awakening. That is what the founders of the 12 steps placed as front and center in step 12. Step 12 begins with these very words, having had a spiritual awakening. In essence, saying that a spiritual awakening is critical to recovery. Let me jump back to the passage from Romans 7 and give you the full passage, including the ending verses 24 and 25. The full passage gives us the solution, much like the 12 steps give us the solution to our addiction problem. Romans 7 gives us the solution to our sin problem and ultimately to our addiction problem as well. The full passage of Romans 7, verses 21 through 25 is this. I have discovered this principle of life, that when I want to do what is right, I inevitably do what is wrong. I love God with all my heart, but there is another power within me that is at war with my mind. This power makes me a slave to the sin that is still within me. Oh, what a miserable person I am. Who will free me from this life that is dominated by sin and death? Thank God, the answer is in Jesus Christ our Lord. Yes, we are all miserable people. We are all wretched people. But God and the Bible do not leave us without hope or without a solution. This passage from Romans says, who will free me from this life that is dominated by sin and death? Thank God, the answer is in Jesus Christ our Lord. The Bible does not leave us without hope, and the 12 steps of recovery do not leave us without hope. They both provide us with hope and a solution, and they are both a spiritual solution, a restored relationship with God by grace through faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. The introduction of the NA book beautifully describes this transition from hopelessness to a spiritual awakening and the importance of the spiritual solution. Here is the quote from the NA introduction that states, based on our experience, we believe that every addict, including the potential addict, suffers from an incurable disease of body, mind, and spirit. We were in the grip of a hopeless dilemma, the solution of which is spiritual in nature. Therefore, this book will deal with spiritual matters. We are not a religious organization. Our program is a set of spiritual principles through which we are recovering from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. Yes, step 12 highlights the importance of a spiritual awakening. And so I encourage you to consider for yourself, have you had a spiritual awakening? Do you have a restored relationship with God? Whether you are in recovery or not, a spiritual awakening and a restored relationship with God is critical for life. It is critical for a full and abundant life, not only free from the bondage of alcohol and drugs, but critical for a life that is at peace with God, such that when you lay your head down at night, you can have a peace and calmness in your mind, body, and spirit. The 12 steps of recovery have indeed helped many millions of people to be successful in recovery. And it is clear that the focus of a spiritual awakening is key to the success of the 12 steps. According to Google, over 30 million books of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous have been sold. And there are many, many 12-step programs spread throughout the world. Clearly, the message of the 12 steps have helped many millions of people. And so I encourage you to consider for yourself the message of the 12 steps and to consider a spiritual awakening for yourself and to consider bringing God into your life and to have a restored relationship with God. And so let me ask you, have you had a spiritual awakening? And do you have a restored relationship with God? That is what I have for you today. Thank you very much for joining me today on the Hope Recovery Podcast. And remember, there is always hope with God. Take care, and God bless you all. That concludes the podcast episode for today, but let me take a moment and give you a brief update. As many of you know, I recently released my brand new book called The 12 Steps of Recovery, Success in Recovery Through a Faith-Based Journey. This new book is now available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Alibris, and many other online retailers. I am very excited about this new book as it presents a fresh new look at the 12 steps with a blend of recovery principles and a faith-based perspective on each of the 12 steps. For me, this podcast and these books are just new ways to minister to people. It is my hope and prayer that this new book would help many people that are struggling with addiction to be successful in recovery and even help them to grow in faith and ultimately help many people to also find a brand new life through success in recovery and faith in the loving God of the Bible. Also, if I may suggest, if you have any of my books, please consider leaving a review or a rating on Amazon or on your favorite online retailer. A review and or rating can help get the books to people that are looking for faith-based recovery books. And if you are interested in more faith-based recovery resources, please see the website at www.HopeRecoveryUs. And if there's any way I can help you or your recovery group or ministry, please feel free to email me at HopeRecoveryUs@gmail.com, and I would be happy to talk with you further. And again, take care, and God bless you all.